So UFC 317 is the headline event of International Fight Week, which is going to be taking place all next week. And I do have a little bit of an announcement for you guys. I am uploading this so early because I am actually going to be away from New Zealand. I'm not going to be at International Fight Week, but I am going to be on a holiday overseas for the next week or so. I am going to one of the Pacific Islands, which should be a pretty nice little change from the winter wonderland that is the place that I am living at right now. So I have done this breakdown early, and my goodness, is it a long one. I am recording this intro after the fact. I think it's over a 50-minute breakdown, but I do go pretty in-depth for a lot of these very exciting matchups because I do think some fights in particular are just awesome. I really do think that this is a pretty solid card despite only being 11 fights, but I will do a follow-up quick picks video probably a couple of days before the event does air, when I am back in the country, when I am back at home. So hopefully you guys do enjoy this video. I do have a bit of an announcement for you guys as well. I do think this is probably going to be one of the final videos that I do with Tapology as my background. I know that I love Tapology. I know I've been a Tapology advocate for a very long time now, and I will still use Tapology in some videos, probably like PFL sort of videos and stuff like that, where it is kind of necessary to really get my point across. But for the UFC breakdowns, I am going to cook up a template probably over the next few weeks or so while I am on semester break, and we can really kind of get things going on that sort of line. So yes, I am going to be going with the template sort of style in the future. I need to kind of come up with something original. I know that DFS by the numbers has a pretty cool one. Angelo, of course, has pretty cool ones every single weekend. Probably not quite Angelo sort of level, I will be honest, but I do think that I am going to be able to come up with something pretty good because I have done all of the graphics for my channel over the last few years, really. So hopefully I can kind of cook up something pretty exciting. And I wanted to do that because I have kind of had a bit of a self-realization moment. Now, I'm not the most self-aware person on the planet. I'm more than aware of that. That's hypocritical. But anyways, I think at this point now that my channel is approaching 10,000 subscribers, that is a huge milestone. I think that it is about time that I do start improving the quality of my content. I've recently improved the quality of my audio, and I do hope that that does come through. And I think that from now on out, I do kind of want to kind of take a bit of a step forward in sort of channel quality, kind of video quality. And after this, I think that that is probably something that you can start seeing changes in the next few weeks. So if you're excited for that, and you do want to help me reach that milestone of 10,000 subscribers, I do appreciate everyone that has supported over the last few years, because I have been doing YouTube for many years now. I think that we are now nearly approaching my 4th year on MMA YouTube. I started this channel in 2021 when I was probably, I would say it would have been July, August at that time. I'll probably break it down in another kind of period of time, what I was going through at the time when I started the channel and this and that. But it was a very low point in my life when I started this channel, but I was passionate about MMA. I thought that I was good at predictions at the time, and, you know, I've kind of always had a pretty good sort of run at predicting UFC fights, right? So I think that I'm pretty happy to be in the position that I am, and it's all because you guys have supported me over the last few years, and they have been a crazy few years. But I think that's something to reflect on for another video. Let me know what you think in the comments about this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. The first fight of the night is going to be Payton Talbott versus Felipe Lima. Now, I do understand that's probably not the bout order they're going to go with, but this is just what I'm working with right now. Talbott was all the hype. He was looking very good on the Contender Series, had a bit of a war with Cortez, and then after that he got a few quick finishes, and he started to look like he could be the next real deal. Also, you know, he's hanging out with Tony Hawk. He's been obviously hanging out with Frank Ocean as well. Like, it kind of seems like Payton Talbott does have superstar material. It's just a shame that he did fall very short against Herne Barcelos. It kind of just looked like he hadn't been really that prepared for the wrestling. And the thing about Talbott is, on the regional scene, if you do watch a lot of his regional scene fights, his takedown defense is not good at all. However, on the Contender Series and in the UFC, that takedown defense improved significantly. So it was a bit of a shame to see him regress kind of in that aspect, kind of fail to the pressure. You know, he did have some moments, I would say, later on in the fight when he had to put the pedal to the metal on the feet, but it just was too little too late. Raoni Barcelos ultimately did win there, and it was a very disappointing loss for Talbott, I think you could say. And on the other hand, Felipe Lima is kind of in the situation Payton Talbott probably was prior to the fight against Barcelos. Now, Felipe Lima is all the rage. He is a former Octagon champion, which is a promotion that I do really, really love, and I do think his performance over Jonas Magard is very impressive over there to win the bout. And then after that, he come in on short notice against Muhammad Naimov at 145 pounds. And then for some reason, he fought against Miles Johns at 145 pounds. Both of them are bantamweights, but nonetheless, we're finally going to see Felipe Lima back in his natural weight class at 135. The thing about Lima is he has looked pretty good. He put a pace on Miles Johns in their fight, just as that most recent one, attempted 5 takedowns, got 2 of them, and ultimately had a very impressive decision win, in my opinion. Against Naimov, he did kind of have to make a bit of a comeback there, but he did end up taking the back up against the cage against Naimov in the 3rd round, and he got it done. Lima is very good. He's got very good boxing. He's got very good grappling. And this is a prospect versus prospect fight. A lot of people don't seem to love this matchup all that much, but in my opinion, I think that they're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So if Talbott beats Felipe Lima, they can just put all their marketing back into Payton Talbott. If Felipe Lima beats Payton Talbott, then they've got another prospect at 135 pounds with a 15-1 record that they can use to build, and maybe he can be the next kind of face of the division potentially. But in this matchup, I am going to be picking Felipe Lima. I think I'm going to be picking Felipe Lima to win by decision. Payton Talbott is going to be a lot taller than Lima. If the takedown defense is as good as it was against guys like Reyes Cortez, I think we could have a very interesting performance here. And I do think that Payton Talbott right now genuinely is a bit of a buy low spot. He is sitting at plus 150. And honestly, I don't really hate him as the underdog. I know a lot of people are going to be on Lima this week. I'm on Lima this week. But I think that Payton Talbott genuinely does have a chance at a knockout in this matchup because he does have a lot of power. I am still going to be picking Lima by decision, though. The next matchup is Jhonata Dinz fighting against Alvin Hines. And Alvin Hines is, of course, taking this fight on short notice. Jhonata Dinz was originally preparing against Justin Tuffer, and for some reason that fight was going to be on the main card. I do not know who Justin Tuffer's manager is or what his contract looks like to get all of these pay-per-view main cards, but yeah, Justin Tuffer just cannot avoid pay-per-view main cards, but unfortunately in this one he did have to pull out, and on short notice we have the undefeated Alvin Hines. Now, I was watching some tape on Hines. He looks very, very good against guys that are a little bit lower level than him, guys that don't have as good wrestling as him. But in his most recent matchup against Billy Ray Valdez, he did take on Valdez, who's a pretty fun striker. And in that matchup, he couldn't really get the takedowns off. Billy Ray Valdez did a very good job of actually sprawling and defending a lot of those takedowns. So we had to see a lot of Hines striking. And the thing about Hines is, I don't love the striking when it comes into a matchup against Jhonata Dinz. Jhonata Dinz is a former Glory kickboxer. He is very slow for the weight class, and I have said that multiple times now, but he does have a lot of power. And Alvin Hines on the feet, I think he's actually got pretty solid boxing. He was mixing in a lot of combinations against Valdez. He does throw a pretty nice uppercut if the fight does get quite close. But I do think that in this matchup, he is going to be at a striking disadvantage, and he is going to need to wrestle to win. Because, of course, we just saw Dinz's wrestling get completely exposed by Marcin Tybura. However, I wouldn't forget that Marcin Tybura got dropped badly by Jhonata Dinz in that matchup. And Jhonata Dinz, if he was just kind of like a little bit smarter and just didn't dive on Tybura, I think that there is a pretty good chance that Jhonata Dinz could have actually walked away with a knockout win against Tybura. So I think in this matchup here, Dinz is only minus 200. Potentially another buy low spot on Jhonata Dinz, just given the short notice nature of the fight. I do think we do see Dinz get the knockout in this one here. And speaking of knockouts, I think Jacobe Smith is just I think he's going to do a lot of damage to Niko Price. I will be honest, no matter how I look at this fight, it's just a bad matchup for Price. You know, we've seen Price, we just got knocked out by Robbie Lawler a couple of years ago. And then he come back and he just lost to Timber Garimbo, and Timber Garimbo was able to get the takedowns off. What does Jacobe Smith do best? It is wrestle. Jacobe Smith is an elite wrestler, and he is fantastic ground and pound. However, he's been really making a name for himself recently with the ridiculous power that he does possess on the feet. Jacobe Smith, he has got one-shot KO power. He has been sleeping guys with one shot on the regional scene. He has been sleeping guys with one shot in the UFC when he smoked Preston Parsons in his UFC debut. Jacobe Smith is the real deal, in my opinion. I believe that as long as Jacobe Smith can just get the takedowns going, he should be fine against a lot of guys in this welterweight division. And once he gets those takedowns, he's pretty ruthless with his ground and pound, man. We saw in the Contender Series how he was able to take down and ground and pound out Christian Savoy. And I do believe against Niko Price on the feet, you know, Price has been knocked out a couple of times now. Jacobe Smith has one-punch KO power. It is ridiculous. I do think that Niko Price is unfortunately going to get knocked out in this matchup. Jacobe Smith in this matchup is minus 1,400. It's just kind of one of those fights where I think that Jacobe Smith does have Price covered in a lot of areas. Hyder Amil is going to be fighting against Jose Delgado in this matchup. I actually do like it for Hyder Amil. Now, I have been quite critical of Amil in the past. I did actually pick against him on the Contender Series when he defeated Emre Sonmez, and then kind of ever since then, he has been on a fantastic run in the UFC. Of course, a pretty controversial fight against William Gomez, which was a very big clash of styles between Amil, who's a bit shorter, wanting to crash the distance, and Gomez, who's a very low volume, rangy striker. And that's what Amil does. You know, Amil's fun. He will come forward, he will wrestle on occasion, but for the most part, he is kind of like a Trevor Peak sort of style fighter, where he is coming forward and just bombing away on the feet. And he is a lot of fun to watch. He's taken on Jose Delgado, who I think you could actually argue is pretty similar in style compared to his most recent fight against William Gomez, given the fact that Jose Delgado is also a pretty tall, rangy guy. He's 5'11" with a 73-inch reach. I thought he looked fantastic on the Contender Series against Ernie Juarez. And then after that, knocked out Conor Matthews, which is a pretty... I mean, everyone's knocking out Conor Matthews these days, but still a pretty good debut to have. I do just worry a little bit about Delgado in some moments. I do think that he can be hittable on the feet. And because he can be hittable on the feet, I think it's a pretty good matchup for Amil to just kind of come forward, crash forward, throw pretty heavy volume, throw those Trevor Peak style hooks. And I think that eventually we are going to see Amil mount some damage on Delgado and find the knockout in this fight. I think that Amil, as the underdog right now, is pretty good. I think a lot of people are looking at that Gomez fight and seeing that Amil struggled in moments with the distance. I think that in this fight, we're going to see Amil crash forward against a guy that I do think is less defensively sound than Gomez is. So I'm going to be picking Amil in this one here as the underdog to win by knockout. And now Terrance McKinney is going to be fighting against Viacheslav Borshchev, and this is actually an epic fight because, of course, we all know that Terrance McKinney does have one-punch knockout power, but he does not really have a chin at all, and he's also, like, he's got power, but he's got no technique as well. I think the fight that really exposed it for McKinney was, of course, the fight against a Bonfim, where McKinney was trying to throw his hooks. His chin was in the air. He was off balance. Some moments you can see screenshots of McKinney. Both of his feet are off the ground when he's trying to fight and land against Bonfim. There's kind of a lot of sort of moments there for McKinney where the striking was kind of exposed. And it's like, okay, it's time for Terrance McKinney to go back to that wrestling because he's got a very strong wrestling base. Of course, Michael Chiesa was his wrestling coach when he was in high school. And he does still have a pretty elite wrestling base that we do see on occasion. He's taken on Viacheslav Borshchev, and you guys know I do love Borshchev. He is a pretty epic fighter. He does have a kickboxing background. He has allegedly over 200 kickboxing fights in Russia. He is a Russian national kickboxing champion, and I do think that you see that in the UFC. I do think that you do see that Borshchev's striking is pretty legit. He doesn't really seem to have the most power in the world, but he's got good technique. He can throw down, and I do think that despite getting caught a couple of times, especially embarrassingly against Chase Hooper, I think that he is like pretty defensively sound. The thing though about Borshchev that has always been his biggest problem is his takedown defense. Borshchev's takedown defense is just not very good. Everyone kind of knows this at this point, unfortunately, for Borshchev, and that is how he lost quite a few of his fights earlier on in his UFC career. I think in this fight, as long as McKinney isn't just coming out there against Borshchev trying to overthrow everything, trying to get a highlight out of Borshchev, I think that he can avoid Borshchev's counter strikes, and I do think that McKinney, if he can come forward, uses striking to set up some wrestling, I think it's going to set up McKinney very, very well in this matchup to find a finish. I do think that McKinney is a flawed fighter. We've seen it many, many times now. I think McKinney, at this point in his career, you do have to worry about the chin. He's been knocked out 5 times. The loss to Ridovich was brutal. The loss to Bonfim was even more brutal, I would argue, and even the Drew Dober. I mean, jeez, man, it's been a lot of damage for McKinney. It really has been a lot of damage for McKinney, but I just don't really see, as much as I love Borshchev, I really do, I just don't see Borshchev catching him in this matchup if McKinney fights smart. I think that McKinney can go out there, get some takedowns going, and I think from there we can see him find a lot of success in the grappling against Borshchev. And now we move up to the middleweight division with Jack Hermansson taking on Gregory Rodrigues. And I think this is a very intriguing matchup, and I am actually quite surprised to see Rodrigues as such a big favorite in this fight. He's minus 180, and I do believe that you can draw some parallels to this fight as what you could between Jack Hermansson and Joe Pyfer. Now, that fight was 5 rounds, but if you do look at Joe Pyfer, also a very tall guy for middleweight, also a very powerful guy for middleweight, and that's kind of what Gregory Rodrigues does bring to the table. He's 6'3", 75 inches of reach, and a lot of power in the hands. The thing that he does have to back up a lot of those power, though, is very good wrestling. He is a national wrestling champion in Brazil, and he does wrestle on occasion. Now, he doesn't wrestle all the time, but he does wrestle on occasion. He is coming off his first UFC main event that didn't quite go his way because he did get knocked out by Jared Cannonier, but now he's back taking on Hermansson, who also has been knocked out by Jared Cannonier. And when I was watching Hermansson's fight against Joe Pyfer, I couldn't believe his chin, man. Like, genuinely, Hermansson won that fight based on the last 3 rounds, but in the first round, Pyfer was landing everything on him. In the second round, Pyfer was also landing pretty well, but then after that, Hermansson was able to get his pressure going, and once he got his pressure going, Hermansson started to take over the fight. But in that first round, I think Pyfer landed in the first maybe 2 minutes, not 20 seconds, 2 minutes, like 3 solid left hooks. You know, he even landed like a head kick to left hook combination on Hermansson, and Hermansson just ate it. So I feel like Hermansson, it's going to take a big shot to knock him out now at this point. Now, I do understand that he's 37 years old, and maybe you could make an argument for that age eventually going to be catching up to him. But right now, you know, he just doesn't really fight that often. It's not like the layoff is something we haven't seen before. You know, he took a year and 2 months off before he fought Joe Pyfer. He's taking a year and 4 months off before fighting Gregory Rodrigues. But I do think that eventually now at 37 years old, we are going to see Hermansson slow down a little bit. He's got a very, very tricky style on the feet. You know, he's got a lot of movement. He kind of jerks his hips and his head like at the same time. It's a very, very odd sort of movement that does make him very hard to hit. And I do think that that is potentially how Chris Curtis really struggled to deal with him, even though Hermansson was moving a lot backwards in that fight. And Joe Pyfer obviously eventually wasn't able to get the knockout and then kind of succumbs to the pressure. Rodrigues, I think, is kind of like a pretty technical striker. He uses his striking well. But in this matchup, I do think that we can see Rodrigues find some more success. Gregory Rodrigues, when he did fight against Cannonier, that was a very big step up in competition at the time. You know, he had just come off the win over Brad Tavares and Christian Leroy Duncan, 2 guys that aren't even in the top 15. And then he just took on Cannonier, who, you know, at this point, like, has still been trying to get that title, to get back into the title conversations. Cannonier is a top guy at 185 pounds. So it was just a big step up in competition for Rodrigues, but I think that Hermansson, kind of sitting at the bottom of the top 15, is a guy, just kind of rankings-wise, that I think Rodrigues, like, a natural progression is pretty good for him. And stylistically-wise, I don't agree with Rodrigues being a minus 180 favorite. I do think that is too wide, but I do think that Rodrigues wins this fight by mixing in the striking with the wrestling again in this fight. I like Rodrigues striking quite a lot. I don't think that it's the best part of his game, which I think is a very controversial opinion, but we have seen Rodrigues caught multiple times in the UFC now. You know, Bruno Ferreira knocked him out in that matchup. We even saw him get caught a lot by Chidi Njokuani, who was also a pretty tricky striker to deal with. So I think that Rodrigues, kind of if he can mix it all up, I think that's just how he found success in his matchups and not just purely trying to strike with someone that is tricky like Hermansson. Now, Viviane Araujo is taking on Tracy Cortez, and I will be honest, guys, Cortez is coming off a pretty embarrassing performance against Rose Namajunas, where she was fighting with the eyelashes, and then Rose Namajunas landed a straight punch that knocked the lashes off Cortez. It was kind of funny at the time, but at the same time, it was also kind of like, why are you worrying about like how good you look in the octagon right now? You're trying to fight. This is the biggest fight of your career. If you beat Rose Namajunas, Rose Namajunas is one of the greatest strawweights of all time, a multiple-time champion at 115 pounds. If you beat Rose Namajunas, you put yourself in title conversations, and it was in a main event as well. Just kind of a wasted opportunity for Cortez there. However, I think that you need to really talk about how good her performance was against Jasmine Jasudavicius. Jasmine Jasudavicius has recently gone on an absolute tear and has also put herself now in those title shot sort of conversations, just given the activity and the dominance that she's had. But, it wasn't all that long ago in Cortez's career, only 2 fights ago, that Cortez actually just beat up Jasudavicius on the feet and really exposed Jasudavicius for the lack of striking that she did have at the time. Now, she has taken on Viviane Araujo, who does a bit of everything. Viviane Araujo, relatively tricky sort of Muay Thai style striker, and she does wrestle and grapple on occasion as well. Coming off, in my opinion, a very, very impressive win to have over Karine Silva, who has been a bit of a scary sort of force in the division recently. Karine Silva, 18 wins, most of them by finish in the first 2 rounds, and Araujo was able to kind of withstand Silva and really inflict her own game plan in that matchup. In my opinion, a very good performance for her at this point in her career, being 38 years old, and arguably kind of on like the last probably 5 fights of her career now. The thing about Cortez, though, is although she did look bad against Rose Namajunas is a tricky style for someone like Cortez, who is primarily a boxer, wrestler sort of fighter. I would say that her boxing is very good. In fact, I would say even though it didn't look good against Rose, I still am very, very impressed by the performance that she did have against Jasudavicius. The thing about Cortez too is she just doesn't fight very often at all, but I do think if she beats Viviane Araujo, she'll probably call to be on that September UFC Noche card, so that could be potentially interesting there too, to see her be a bit more active. But in this matchup, I think that Cortez, I do like her striking if she can kind of implement her pressure forward game plan. If she gets pressured by Viviane Araujo, I do think that it's going to be a little bit of a different story. Viviane Araujo, of course, did have that fight against Alexa Grasso. It was a long time ago now, but Viviane Araujo kind of held her own there for 5 rounds, and Alexa Grasso then went on to beat Valentina Shevchenko in her next fight after that. But I do think that we are going to see Cortez in this matchup win a decision based on that boxing. As long as she is the one pressuring forward, I think she's the one that's going to be finding the success. And now we're going to be having a very, very exciting fight at 125 pounds between Brandon Royval and Joshua Van. Joshua Van, of course, stepping up on very short notice. I believe he actually accepted this fight the day after he had a career performance against Bruno Silva. So he's going to be coming in after only a couple of weeks off in between fights to fight against the #1 contender right now in Brandon Royval. And, well, I mean, #1 contender aside from Kai Kara France, I guess you could say. But Brandon Royval is coming off 2 very, very good performances. The problem with Royval, just kind of in this sort of title discussion, is he has lost to Alejandro Pantoja a couple of times now, and I do believe that for Royval to get a 3rd shot at Pantoja, he did need to go on a win streak, and that is exactly what he's done. He's gone out there. I think he's kind of realized that he's lost to Pantoja 2 times in the space of only a couple of years, and I think that now, if he can beat Josh Van, I think that he is going to be the next one to fight against Pantoja. And on the other hand, just given the activity for Van, given the fact that he's been a company man, I guess you could say, I know it's an opportunity really to fight the #1 guy on short notice, but he's saving a very, very good fight on a card that is only 11 fights long right now at the time of recording. So I think that for Van, if he beats Royval, could we see Joshua Van by Alejandro Pantoja in the future? That could be exciting as well. Now, I am going to talk about Joshua Van first, because full transparency, guys, I have really grown to like Joshua Van. Here's the situation that I found myself in when I was covering Joshua Van initially. If you do go all the way back, and here's the thing about Van that I need to give him his respect for. This guy has improved so much in the last 3 years. Like, the development that this guy is making is ridiculous. Because if you do go to his Fury FC matchups, and you do watch his fight against Cleveland McLean, you watch his fight against Paris Moran, the takedown defense, it was a concern. Now, he was fighting guys that were way, way bigger than him because he is very small for 125 pounds. But he come into the UFC on short notice, I believe, against Viacheslav, looked pretty good in a pretty close fight, and then after that, we've really kind of seen him start to have career performances. You know, the performance against Borshchev wasn't that great, but after that, it's been all up since the loss to Charles Johnson. And I did pick Charles Johnson to win that matchup, and ever since then, I think we've seen kind of Van learn from those mistakes, learn that distance management, maybe even improve the takedown defense even more. And we saw that in the Ray Saruya fight, how good his takedown defense truly has become, because Ray Saruya is an elite fighter, in my opinion, a very, very good wrestler, a freestyle junior world champion in wrestling. Ray Saruya, very, very talented guy. And Van was able to defend the takedowns, was able to be the more well-rounded fighter in that matchup, and was able to get the boxing going. But of course, it was the fight against Bruno Silva that I believe has truly put him on the map for everyone to truly see, because that was an amazing win where he was, you know, landing over and over and over again, was getting knockdowns every single round, was boxing up Bruno Silva, was defending takedowns of Bruno Silva when he shot them, and just overall had the career best performance for him. The problem that I do have with Van, and this is something that's never really going to change unless you give him multiple years to do it, he is so small for the weight class that when he does take on guys like Brandon Royval, I do believe the size is going to be of concern, because Joshua Van, he's listed at 5'5", but if you do see him fight against Charles Johnson, you do see him fight against Edgar Chairez actually, especially too. He is a very small guy at 125 pounds, and Royval is a very big guy for 125 pounds at 5'9". And another thing as well that I need to say about Brandon Royval is I think that Royval has also been making improvements in his career over the last few years, because Royval was always that kill or be killed kind of guy. He was always coming forward, he was always just throwing down, he was very hittable, he would try and get submissions, very submission over position kind of guy. He would either get the submission or he would get caught in one. And that is kind of what stopped Brandon Royval from being the number one guy, from being the guy to beat that he is right now. I think was kind of just that style of just being too aggressive, being too fun. I know that sucks to say because MMA, a lot of us do watch it for entertainment, but I think Royval was just trying to be too fun in a lot of moments, and he was just coming forward and being too aggressive. But the thing about Brandon Royval, though, recently is I think that we've started to see a very big improvement in the striking technique and a very big improvement in the fight IQ, and the fight IQ especially in the grappling moments, because he did just beat Tatsuro Taira. I know it's a split decision. I thought he won the fight, and I know he just beat Brandon Moreno. I know it's also a split decision. I think he won the fight again, and I think in those matchups, he actually beat those two guys in positions that both guys are pretty comfortable in. You know, Taira was constantly trying to get the back of Royval, constantly trying to grapple him. Royval was able to do more damage over the 5 rounds, and then Moreno, we saw Royval find a lot of success in the strike. You know, Moreno's always been praised for just having a great jab, for having great boxing, and we saw Royval find a lot of success in that matchup with the striking. Against Joshua Van, though, this is where it gets interesting, because if Royval can't get the takedowns on Joshua Van, Van is a guy that I would actually describe as a very good 3-round fighter, because Van, he just fights with a very, very fast pace. And the thing about Van is I feel like maybe if you try to put that pace over 5 rounds, maybe then you could see Van sort of slow down in round 4 or 5, and we've just been kind of seeing Royval fight in these 5-round fights where the pace has been a little bit slower. But I think then the argument that you would make is Brandon Royval has always been that 3-round fighter. He's always been that fast-paced guy. He's always been the one pushing the pace. So I genuinely think that we could get an absolute car crash in this matchup between Van, who's going to be throwing combinations, who's going to be looking to box up Royval. I didn't even mention it, but the leg kicks from Van is awesome as well. Royval throws great kicks himself, you know, just being 5'9" at 125 pounds, of course. But I also think about this matchup too, in the grappling, because I do believe that Royval is going to be able to get takedowns against Joshua Van. I am very, very aware about how good Van's takedown defense looked against Saruya. I'm very aware about how good it looked against Bruno Silva. But the thing is now about Ray Saruya is Saruya just didn't have striking to set anything up. And Brandon Royval, he does. He does have very good striking, and he's got very solid wrestling and grappling as well. As much as I have really grown to just really, really like Joshua Van as a prospect, as a fighter, 23 years old, he's living the dream. He just bought his mum a house like 3 days ago. I mean, that's something that I think everyone really does try to aspire to do with their own kind of, I guess, aspirations and stuff like that. And he's been able to live the dream for him. And Brandon Royval, he is my pick, though. He is my pick. I am picking Brandon Royval to win this fight by decision. I think it's going to be a banger. I think that you could make an argument for Joshua Van. If it was on a full camp, full transparency, I probably would still pick Brandon Royval, just kind of given the stylistic matchup here. And I think that the odds makers are really respecting Van in this spot, because Van is only -105 and Royval is -115. Another thing as well that I think you could say is Royval was preparing for Manel Kape. And Manel Kape recently, and I know this is going to sound a little bit confusing, but Manel Kape recently, I feel like, has just kind of been in that flow state striking where he's super, super fast. He's been looking really good. He's been putting on career performances himself. And I think that Joshua Van and Manel Kape of recent actually kind of do strike similarly. Now, they're not the same. I'm not going to say that they're the same, but I think they're somewhat similar. So I do think a preparation for Manel Kape on Brandon Royval's side actually is going to be beneficial for him for his preparation against Josh Van. So with that being said, I'm going to pick Royval by decision. I know I just talked about that fight for a very long time, but I am excited for it. It is one of the best fights on the card in my opinion. And now we can move up to Dariush versus Moicano. These two were of course booked to fight against each other on the pay-per-view about 5 months ago. And in that fight, Islam Makhachev had to have his El Ayacuinta moment, where he fought against Renato Moicano on 1 day's notice. Moicano stepped up, and of course Arman Tsarukyan pulled out. And Arman Tsarukyan, let's be honest guys, he probably did injure his back trying to impress Nina Marie, because if you do see him do that head spin that he did grab his back afterwards, which is hilarious. But anyway, Moicano got the title shot on 1 day's notice. Respect to Moicano for doing that. Unfortunately, it just didn't quite go his way. But I think now we're going to get the rebooking. I think that's what is appropriate here. And I think a lot of people are really high on Moicano still. I know that he lost to Islam Makhachev on 1 day's notice. And, like, that was just a bad matchup for Moicano. Like, it just was. And he's taking on Dariush here. And I'm actually going to be picking Dariush now, even after that fight did happen. I think that Dariush, as the underdog, has an opportunity here. The thing about Dariush is he was on a win streak. He was looking fantastic, but he hasn't won in over 2.5 years. The losses that he has had to Charles Oliveira, which he got head kicked, but in that fight, I think that you would look at that and actually see Moicano style and see that Oliveira was finding a lot of top control pressure in that matchup. And if you do kind of think about Charles Oliveira's game, Charles Oliveira isn't really a guy that does just mount you and hold you down for rounds on end. And Moicano is. And if Charles Oliveira can do it, I think then maybe you could make the argument that Moicano can. And then he did get slept by Arman Tsarukyan, which was just a bit sad. It just was. But the thing about Moicano is Moicano just doesn't really have that one-punch KO power. Yes, he is absolutely massive for 155 pounds. Aside from the domination over Benoit Saint Denis and the TKO over Jalen Turner after Turner kind of looked like he gave up after he kind of just threw away the fight, he doesn't really have big TKO wins. In fact, they're the first two TKO wins of his entire career. Before then, he had the moments on the feet against Drew Dober, especially against Alexander Hernandez, actually, I should say too. But Moicano is not really a guy that I consider on the feet to have a lot of power. I do think he's got good ground and pound. We've seen that, and we've seen that he's got good grappling too with control. Beneil Dariush, though, he is an elite defensive wrestler. Despite getting held down by Olives, he did show fantastic sprawl against Mateus Gamrot. He beat Ferguson, but 4 years ago now. Oh, it's just so hard. I'm grasping at straws right now. You know what I mean? Trying to pick Dariush here, but I don't know how to describe it, guys. I think Dariush's striking is underrated. I do think that Dariush in this matchup can defend takedowns, maybe get some reversals, maybe get some control of his own. I think as long as the fighter's on the feet, I know Moicano's fun, I know everyone loves him, I think that Dariush is going to hold a slight advantage. I'm picking Beneil Dariush in this matchup here. I think if you're picking Moicano, you are picking Renato Moicano to go out there, take down Beneil Dariush, and control him for rounds on end. And personally, I just can't really see that happening. But we just saw Dariush get knocked out, but get slept by Saruhian. And it's just sad. It's just sad to see. So maybe Dariush really is a shell of himself. I'm kind of banking on that not really being the case. And now we move up to the co-main event of the evening, Alejandro Pantoja fighting against Kai Kara-France, and I genuinely am so excited for this fight. Not only because I'm from New Zealand and I do believe that Kai Kara-France does represent us well, I also really like Alejandro Pantoja. I'm a big fan of Alejandro Pantoja. I picked him to win the trilogy fight, to beat Brandon Moreno for a third time a couple of years ago, and then ever since then we've seen Alejandro Pantoja have a pretty impressive title reign. In my opinion, I think a pretty underrated title reign, but a couple of those fights have been somewhat boring, I will understand. Now, of course, Kai Kara-France, he is now at this point a very dangerous striker to contend with, and I think stylistically is a pretty difficult fight for Pantoja. The thing is, though, Pantoja has beaten him before. Pantoja's beaten literally everyone in the division before, right? I mean, they're signing guys from Ryzen, they're signing guys from Bellator, they're signing guys from everywhere to try and give Pantoja they just re-signed Kyoji Haraguchi. You know, Pantoja's fought everyone. But anyways, Kai Kara-France, very good defensive grappling, very good takedown defense. In fact, in my opinion, some of the best in the entire UFC, and I think that we have seen it showcased throughout multiple performances now in his career. I think especially a big one is the knockout win over Rogerio Bontorin, which is a pretty good one. Now, I do understand getting put in that position against Bontorin, a little bit concerning, I'm aware, but we did still see him escape that position, very tough moments, and then get out of it, get the knockout. And then against Askar Askarov, to this day, probably the best prediction of my YouTube career, I would say, is picking Kai Kara-France to defeat Askar Askarov as a plus 340 underdog. So I do think that just given the stylistic matchup, and even the fact that I believe that he beat Amir Albazi, I think that was a pretty bad decision, but I think you can actually draw a lot of parallels to this fight and the Amir Albazi fight. But I just want to kind of say that on the feet, I think Kai Kara-France has a very big striking advantage here, because Alejandro Pantoja, as much as I love him, and as much as his striking is pretty fun, because he does throw down, he does come forward, he does kind of bomb away boxing combinations in the pocket, I think that he does get himself caught in some bad positions and moments. You know, it almost does seem like in some moments he's kind of like this. Like, this is Pantoja. I know that Kai Kara-France does this too sometimes, but Pantoja's like this, and he's just kind of like wailing away, and like looks like his head's down. I don't really want to show off my hairline that much, but it's his head's down, and he's just kind of throwing away. I don't really love seeing that out of Pantoja in moments, but I think the thing about Pantoja that makes him so great is his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's got a very elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. He has managed to transfer that over to MMA incredibly well, which has now got him into the situation that he is right now, which is a champion with 3 title defenses in the last couple of years, and potentially 4, which would make him one of the most active champions in the UFC right now. The thing is, though, I think you can make a very good argument for Kai Kara-France to beat him. I do genuinely believe that Kai Kara-France knocked out Steve Erceg recently. That's a fantastic win, and Steve Erceg, MMA mathing it out, gave Pantoja a very tough fight. And then, of course, against Amir Albazi, I thought that Kai Kara-France beat Amir Albazi, but you know, I mean, the decision didn't quite go his way. That is a shame, but I thought that Kai Kara-France won. I believe it was rounds 1 and 4 and 5, but in round 2 and 3, we did see Amir Albazi find the success in the wrestling there, and I do think that it's kind of moments like that that does bring some concern, because if you look at Alejandro Pantoja's win over Brandon Moreno the third time, the one that happened a couple of years ago when Pantoja won the belt, that is one of Pantoja's best performances in my opinion. I think if you do watch it, you see Pantoja find a lot of very good moments against a guy that I know Kai Kara-France and Moreno are not similar in really any way, but I think a lot of things that Pantoja did in that fight, I think that he can do against Kai Kara-France, which was pressure Moreno back up into the cage and use his strength to drag Moreno down to the ground. I think he could potentially do that to Kai Kara-France. I know that city kickboxing guys are notoriously good for takedown defense up against the cage. I mean, you just really got to look at I mean, Israel Adesanya and even like Dan Hooker against Mateus Gamrot even. And I think that, you know, maybe we could see Kai Kara-France show that. But the thing about Kai Kara-France is, and I was just saying about Josh Van. He is a small guy for 125 pounds. And I do believe that Pantoja is going to have a size and a strength advantage here. So I think that Pantoja, you know, if he does kind of just come forward, put his head down, doesn't get knocked out, which is easier said than done against Kai Kara-France. You know, Kai Kara-France must have some records right now at this moment for most knockouts at 125 pounds in the UFC recently. But, you know, he is a very good sort of power striker. He does land well, and he does throw combinations as well. That's what matters too. And the thing is too, Kai Kara-France, when he's taken on a good striker like Brandon Moreno, which he did do a couple of years ago, I believe, for the interim title at the time, you know, Kai Kara-France was starting to find his rhythm before Moreno caught him with that liver kick there. And I think that if you give Kai Kara-France time to find his rhythm, which does take time, it took time for him to find it against Amir Albazi. He started that fight a bit slow. I think Kai Kara-France could be a very difficult guy to deal with. And the thing about Pantoja too is I would never say that Pantoja has bad cardio. He has had to dig really deep. In the 5th round against Brandon Moreno and in the 5th round against Steve Erceg, Pantoja, he wasn't gassed. I'm never going to say that he was gassed, but he had to dig deep in those moments. He really did. And I do believe that if Kai Kara-France can start fast, maybe land body shots early, land a lot of strikes early, getting hit in the face isn't fun, guys. It isn't. And it does tire you out if you can believe it. Maybe Kai Kara-France can find some momentum and get something going, but I do think stylistically, it's a grappler versus striker matchup. Kai Kara-France, I do really, really like Kai Kara-France as a fighter, and I do actually believe if he won this title against Pantoja, he would be a very, very fun champion, and maybe he could bring the UFC back to New Zealand, because it seems like we're never going to get a card here. I'm having to travel to Australia to go to cards now, man. It's crazy. But anyways, I think that we do see in this matchup, I think Pantoja, he is the more well-rounded guy. As much as I have kind of glazed Kai Kara-France takedown defense over the years, Pantoja, at the end of the day, he is an elite grappler. We just saw him eat some massive shots against Kai Asakura. You know, here's the thing about that fight, right? Yes, Pantoja did win it, and yes, he did win it somewhat easily. Pantoja ate the most brutal jump knee from Kai Asakura early in that matchup. Like, Pantoja's got a chin on him, man. And, you know, Kai Kara-France is going to have to land a couple of massive shots, in my opinion, to knock out Pantoja. And unfortunately, as much as I do love him, and as much as he has been slept on by the public, only 11% of people on Tapology picking Kai Kara-France, I am going to side with Alejandro Pantoja to win this matchup. But I genuinely would not be all that surprised if we saw Kai Kara-France manage to maybe not come away with the victory, but give Pantoja a very close matchup, just like the matchup between Steve Erceg was, and just like the matchup between Brandon Moreno was a couple of years ago. So now we have it. We have the main event of the evening. It is Ilia Topuria taking on Charles do Bronx Oliveira, and I know you guys are as excited for this matchup as I am. Not only did Topuria have to vacate his title to move up to 155 pounds for this opportunity, Islam Makhachev pretty much at the same time also vacated his title to move up to 170 pounds. So Ilia Topuria vacated his title for this opportunity at 155, and then Makhachev, the current champion or previous champion, also vacated. So this is it. This is for the 155 pound bout. And honestly, I don't really know if you could make a more exciting matchup at this weight class than what this is right now. Ilia Topuria, of course, is now going to be bringing his elite boxing and grappling, because I do still truly believe that Ilia Topuria's grappling is as good, if not better, than his striking. And I know that we've seen his boxing for a long time now. He knocked out Volkanovski. He knocked out Max Holloway. He put an absolute beating on Josh Emmett. But we haven't seen Topuria grapple for a very long time. And I genuinely do rate Topuria's grappling incredibly highly. He is an elite grappler. But we've just seen the boxing kind of just get it done for him recently. And despite what despite what a lot of people say, I personally think that Topuria's boxing, it's not that traditional. He doesn't really fight behind a jab. He's a very aggressive, hooks heavy guy. He will come forward and he will crash the pocket, and he will throw his combinations mostly based on pretty looping strikes, in my opinion. Now, a lot of people seem to disagree with me on that, but that is how I see Topuria as a striker. I think he's a very pressure forward guy, and I think he wants to land a lot of his strikes in close range. And that is pretty much the opposite, but also the same as Charles Oliveira, because as you guys may or may not know, Oliveira and the shooter box guys all fight the exact same way. They are ridiculously aggressive Muay Thai strikers. They just crash forward with their Muay Thai. From range, Oliveira, he'll be throwing up the teep kicks, he'll be throwing up the push kicks, but for the most part, Oliveira is also going to be, despite trying to snipe from range, he's also going to crash forward to land his knees, to get his clinch going. He's got a very good Thai clinch as well. He does, get his hands on the head and just throw down a lot of knees. And I think that we could potentially see that against a shorter opponent as well in Topuria, because in my opinion, I don't think that Topuria is going to look like a full-size lightweight. Now, I'm fully prepared to admit that I'm wrong about that once the fight takes place and the Topuria looks bigger than I think he's going to. But I personally have never really viewed Ilia Topuria, despite him having the weight issues at 145 pounds, as a massive guy for 145. Now, of course, the scale does say a different thing. Apparently, in the off-season, Ilia Topuria has been walking around at 170 pounds, which, for a guy that's 5'7", that's pretty big. It's pretty significant in size. And I think that now moving up to 155 pounds, I'm seeing a lot of people saying he's going to be 180 pounds. 180 pounds at 5'7", he's going to have to put on a little bit of muscle, put on a bit of weight to really pull that off. But I do think that Topuria, if you give him a little bit more time, I think at 155, he could be an absolute dominant force. Kind of like our short king, Volkanovski, was able to do when he did fight against Islam Makhachev. But I do think that going in there against Charles Oliveira for your first fight is pretty tough, because Oliveira is a very big guy for 155. He's very powerful. I think Justin Gaethje has backtracked this statement, but at one point Justin Gaethje did say that Charles Oliveira was the hardest hitting guy that he had ever fought at 155 pounds. And you do kind of see that. He's knocked out Michael Chandler. He's, really hurt and stung Gaethje on the feet. He stung Poirier on the feet as well. And I think that just kind of given the fact that Oliveira can snipe from range, I think that he is going to potentially be a pretty hard fight for Topuria when it comes to the striking. The problem that I have, though, is Topuria is very, very good at implementing his own game plan and making his opponents do what he wants them to do. He wants to back up his opponents. He wants his opponents to be circling into his power hands. He wants his opponents to be crashing forward just like Oliveira does. And this is the problem with Oliveira, man, is he does get hit. Now, I know that Michael Chandler was trying to take years off his life by just absolutely hammering the back of his head, but that is what Michael Chandler does. Oliveira did still get caught by Chandler in that moment. That wasn't really great to see. He did get caught by Islam Makhachev. He tried to pull guard like he does every time he gets caught, because he was getting caught by Gaethje as well, and it didn't work out for him. Like, even Sarukian, I don't think that Sarukian was really having that many moments on the feet, but, even some moments, I guess you could say, there was some concern there. The thing about Oliveira is, at this point, he is hittable. He does get hit. He does pull guard, which I don't think is going to be that good when you're taking on a guy like Topuria, who can grapple as well. I think that's something that a lot of people overlook now that he's been so dominant with the boxing, is Topuria's grappling is legit. I rate it very, very highly. I think that it's something that he can impose. Now, maybe he couldn't physically impose it by trying to out-wrestle someone like Arman Sarukian, by trying to out-wrestle like Mateus Gamrot. I know that that's probably like a lot of people like, Gamrot's not elite anymore, this and that, but still, like Topuria trying to just out-muscle someone like Gamrot, a very elite, pure wrestler, I'd be very impressed to see if he could manage to kind of just go out there and do that right now, because he has fought at 155 before, and I know that this is a narrative that a lot of people are going to drive, including myself. I'm about to do it right now. He did not look great against Jai Herbert. Yes, he got a highlight reel knockout, multiple hook combination. It was a sick KO, but the build-up to that was concerning. Jai Herbert caught him. Jai Herbert had his moments, and at 155, Topuria is going to be fighting guys that hit harder than Jai Herbert. I know Herbert's a very good kickboxer, but he's not like an elite kickboxer. You know what I mean? He's not like super A tier. And he's going to be taking on Oliveira, who hits hard, who's got very good kickboxing, who's got very good knees in the clinch, as I did mention earlier. And even Gaethje, who's threatening retirement, but Gaethje's also a pretty elite striker. But yeah, so Topuria's going to have to deal with these guys that hit hard. Guys that hit harder than the guys that he fought at 145 pounds. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But with that being said, 7-minute breakdown behind me, I really want to pick Oliveira because I genuinely do believe that there is a pretty clear path to victory. And I know a lot of people are going to strongly disagree with that. I just can't see Oliveira going out there against Ilia Topuria, landing heavy strikes from range, and potentially, as well as that, getting takedowns on Topuria and being able to kind of lay and prey on him in moments like he was able to do against Beneil Dariush, or, you know, find success against Topuria, maybe get caught once or twice and then pull guard, and Topuria's not just going to dive after him, like, because Topuria would dive after him, I do believe that, like as Makhachev did. I just can't see Oliveira doing all of this without getting caught once. That's what it comes down to. I do believe if there was going to be a minute winner in that fight, and this is another thing which so many people disagree with me on. The thing about me and Ilia Topuria is I have picked Ilia Topuria to win fights, but I do just think that the way he does it is a little bit different to how a lot of people do. You know, like, here's the thing about the Volk fight. Ilia Topuria, he wasn't winning that fight until he caught Volkanovski. He just wasn't. And then also against Max Holloway, I think he had a much better performance, but I also would argue that Holloway was probably having a lot of his own moments as well, which I think a lot of people forget about, given the fact that he was the first person to knock out Holloway. But that's the thing about Topuria, is Topuria, I do think that he is going to potentially start slow, but I just don't think that he can against Oliveira, because I think Oliveira is just going to be so hittable. Topuria is going to have the opportunities to knock him out. So I'm picking Ilia Topuria to win by KO. I think my breakdown got a bit confusing there at the end. I do apologize. The pick is Ilia Topuria by knockout. I think he knocks out Charles Oliveira in the first 3 rounds. As sad as it is for me to say this, I think Oliveira is going to have to be able to do too much without getting hit. And I just don't think he can do that against a guy that's going to be so fast. I didn't even bring up the speed that Topuria has in this whole breakdown. I just talked for 9 minutes and didn't bring up the speed difference. Topuria is going to be the fastest striker. I think he can land. That's kind of it. I mean, I think this is a very long video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys in the next one.